Okay, so in the animal kingdom, we're going to be working through phylums, phyla. And the first one is Porifera, which is the most simple animal that we're going to be talking about. It is an animal, and to be an animal, you have to move at some point in your life. So sponges do move when they're like little embryos and they float around in the water. Eventually they attach somewhere and they don't move after that. But we have fossils that are like 540 million years ago during the Cambrian explosion of life. We have fossils of sponges. So these are sponges. And a sponge isn't symmetrical, meaning that there's no symmetry, there's no mirroring. Unlike SpongeBob SquarePants, there's no such thing as a square sponge because they're asymmetrical. So we're actually going to draw one. All sponges have a hollow body. So for example, this sponge, when you look into it, has a hollow body. And again, this is an animal. It eats, and when it's in the larva stage, it does move around. And it is covered in spikes for protection, so that fish, when they eat it, it's like trying to eat a cactus. And the spikes are called spicules. And today during the lab, you'll see spicules under the microscope. You wouldn't want to wash your car with a real ocean sponge because you'd scratch the paint right off. This is what people use to like soak up water and scrub stuff. So that actually brings me to the name. The name is called Porifera for sponges, and that's because they are full of holes, which in Latin is pores. So there are holes all over sponges, just like the ones you have at home that soak up water, but they're called pores. And they suck water in.
To make the invisible visible, Diaz injects a harmless colored dye into the water near the body of a sponge.
One of the ways we can test for the rate of water flow that moves through the sponge body is to inject a colored dye and measure the speed at which it is pumped through the sponge.
So they pull water in, and the water has plankton in it, like just plankton in it. And the sponge, that's what they're eating. They're eating the plankton. So this is water and plankton coming into the center of the sponge. And in the center of a sponge, there are these little cells that filter out the plankton. And those little cells are called collar cells, and they line the inside of the sponge. And so they get all the food out of the water, and then the water comes out the hole in the top. Technically, the water that comes out is cleaner than the water that came in because there's no more plankton in it. It's just pure water. This hole right here has a name called osculum. So on the test, that is something you're going to have to label: pores, spicules, and collar cells. So there's only 4 labels on the sponge. Here is a picture of a sponge, and this sponge is going extinct because scuba divers keep sitting in them and it kills them. She's also sitting in basically the anus where it's releasing everything. Good job. Way to pick a good spot to sit. Anyway, that's a sponge. There's another picture in your book that looks like this. You can see the pores, the hole at the top called osculum, the collar cells, which are for eating, and then the spicules, which you'll see them under the microscope. They actually look just like that. All right, so on this paper, leave this bottom part blank, and we're going to move to the next one, the Cnidarians. And Cnidarian means stinging, like stinging cells. And these are the guys that'll sting you. I bet you could guess a few right now. Right? Not a stingray. We're not talking about vertebrates this chapter. There's nothing with any sort of spinal cord or anything like that. These, they're referring to jellyfish, sea anemones, coral. They all have little tentacles and inside the tentacles are stinging cells. And I have a video of it that I'll be showing you next class. So jellyfish, this is a man-of-war, Portuguese man-of-war. That's actually a colony of jellyfish. Sea anemone. They all have the same sort of setup. Coral. And coral, usually when you see coral, this is the skeleton, but there's a whole bunch living together. And in each little pocket is a little polyp. It's basically mini sea anemones. So, write down some of those. Jellyfish, sea anemone, coral, hydra. Hydra is basically a very microscopic sea anemone. And I have it in the microscope at the lab today. They have these stinging cells that, and I'll show you a video of this. There's a thread and then there's a barb in here. And on the barb is a neurotoxin. So super dangerous, because if you get stabbed by the barb, it'll shut your nervous system off. It paralyzes its prey. Normally, if you're touching something like a sea anemone, if you've ever touched the side tentacles, these parts right here, and it feels sticky, that's because thousands and thousands and thousands of barbs are going to your skin. And the barb is, your skin and your finger is too thick, so it can't get through. But the sea anemone is in fact trying to kill you. It would like you to die so that it can eat you. So it's sending thousands of barbs into your body, which doesn't work if you touch, and this is a trigger. So if you touch that, this shoots out and releases the neurotoxin into your bloodstream and paralyzes the prey. So obviously sea anemone can't get into your skin. I have a friend who was down at the tide pools with a bunch of little kids. We were teaching them, and there were sea anemones there, and he was trying to get these little 5-year-olds to touch it. And he said, look, it won't hurt you. And he leaned over and licked it. He stuck his tongue on the tentacles. And I was standing there thinking, oh, I don't think you can't do that. I don't think you can do that. Anyway, so within about 3 minutes, he came over to me and said, my tongue is going numb. I can't feel anything. His tongue swelled up. His tongue swelled up to the point where he started to not be able to breathe. He totally got stung by a sea anemone. We had to get an ambulance for him, and he had to get taken to the hospital because his tongue was swelling up. All the little 5-year-olds were freaking out and crying. Like, good job. Way to show somebody that sea anemones are in fact totally harmless. Don't lick things in the tide pool. Anyway, so these little stinging cells are called nematocysts, which I will show you a video next class. They either have the tentacles hanging down, or the tentacles are up. So if they're hanging down, it's medusa, like a jellyfish. If you put a jellyfish on your head, all the tentacles could be like hair. I don't recommend doing that. This guy, the tentacles are up. This is a polyp. So those are the two shapes. And basically, for any like sea anemone, most of the time they're just eating something small. So like if you're a plankton and you're having a good life, just kind of floating around, you can't really control where you go, and you accidentally hit one of these tentacles, it'll shoot a couple 100,000 barbs into your body, these little nematocysts, and then you get paralyzed and you get brought into the mouth. And in here, you're still alive, and it starts to digest you while you're alive and paralyzed. The mouth, which some of you have probably touched before, happens to also be the anus, where all the digested particles will come back out again. It's the same place. The mouth and the anus are the same place. Don't put your hand right there. That's kind of weird. And if it's a more dangerous, like jellyfish or something, the barbs can get through your skin. It depends on the species. Portuguese man-of-war can absolutely get into your skin. A lot of jellyfish can. The one that lives off our coast, called the purple striped jelly, cannot get through your skin. That does not mean you should run around and grab them all. They can sting, and because they don't have any eyes or anything, These, all you have to do is touch it for it to get triggered. So the jellyfish can be dead. And if the cells are still functioning, because it just recently died, it can still sting you. So that's the stinging guys, Cnidarian. The C is completely silent, Cnidarian. And finally, the worms, which you're going to do a lab on, and I'm going to talk more about worms later.